The desert holds many secrets, but none as powerful as those carried in a broken heart. When Lúuna stumbled into the Apache camp, her eyes downcast and her spirit crushed, she expected to become property. Instead, Kaagání, with hands calloused from years of hunting, offered something she had forgotten existed: dignity. Under the vast Arizona sky, where stars whispered ancient stories, he taught her not servitude, but strength. His people had survived centuries of hardship, and in their ways, Lúuna found her own resilience blooming like desert flowers after rain. But when enemy riders appeared on the horizon, would her newfound courage be enough to stand beside the man who had restored her soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blood-red sunset painted long shadows across the desert floor as Lúuna ran. Her once fine lace dress, now torn and caked with dust, caught on a mesquite branch. She yanked it free, leaving behind another small piece of her former life. 3 days since the raid. 3 days since she had watched from behind a water barrel as marauders torched her family's homestead. 3 days since her father's final words to her: "Run east, child. Don't look back." East led to Apache territory. A choice between certain death and probable death, her father had always said. Now that choice was all she had left. Lúuna's cracked lips stung as she took the last sip from her canteen. The water tasted of metal and desperation. Her legs trembled beneath her, muscles stretched beyond endurance. The scattered yucca plants offered no shelter from the merciless sun or the memories that pursued her more relentlessly than any physical threat. Sleep had been her enemy. Each time exhaustion claimed her, the screams returned her mother's final cry, her younger brothers terrified, sobbing before it was suddenly, horribly silenced. Better to walk until consciousness failed than to invite those ghosts with closed eyes. Find water by tomorrow, or die in this wilderness, she whispered to herself, her voice rough from disuse and thirst. The statement wasn't a fear, but a simple truth, as undeniable as the sun above or the sand below. As dusk gathered, the distant Dragoon Mountains took on a purple hue. Somewhere in those foothills lay Apache encampments people her settlement had feared with the kind of terror reserved for natural disasters and vengeful gods. Stories of their raids had haunted her childhood dreams long before real nightmares claimed her waking hours. A thin wisp of smoke rose from a cluster of cottonwoods ahead. Camp? Settlement? Friend or foe? It hardly mattered anymore. Without water, without shelter, without hope, distinctions between enemies blurred. Lúuna fingered the small silver locket at her throat, the only possession she'd managed to save. Inside, a miniature portrait of her mother smiled with a happiness that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. "What would you do, Mother?" she whispered, but the painted eyes offered no counsel. The smoke beckoned, promising at least an end to uncertainty. Lúuna stumbled forward, her hand instinctively smoothing what remained of her once beautiful dress. The garment had been a gift for her 19th birthday, meant for troop-going and courtship. Now it served as a shroud for the woman she had been educated, genteel, protected. As the last light faded from the sky, she spotted them. Conical structures nestled among the trees. Not the wooden cabins or adobe houses of her people, but Wikiep's Apache dwellings. Voices carried on the evening breeze, speaking in unfamiliar cadences. A dog barked a warning. Lúuna paused at the edge of their world, gathering what little dignity remained to her. Her father had taught her that dignity was sometimes all a person had left. If she was to die here, or worse, she would do so with her head high. A tall figure emerged from between the dwellings, a man with broad shoulders and a face carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. A hunter, judging by the bow, slung across his back and the knife at his belt. His obsidian eyes found her immediately. As though he had been expecting her arrival, Lúuna took a deep breath and stepped into the firelight. She had nothing left to barter with but herself. The man's expression revealed nothing as he assessed the strange woman who had wandered into his camp. Behind him, others gathered, their faces showing mixtures of suspicion, curiosity, and guarded hostility. "I seek shelter," Lúuna said, knowing they likely wouldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would convey her desperation. With trembling hands, she gestured to herself, and then to the camp. "I offer myself in exchange." The tall hunter's eyes narrowed slightly, the first change in his impassive expression. He took a step toward her, and Lúuna fought the urge to retreat. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. If this was to be her fate, she would face it standing. The tall hunter's hand moved, not to his knife as Lúuna had feared, but to an eagle feather secured in his long black hair. He touched it briefly, as though drawing strength from its presence. Before extending his empty palm toward her dot, no words passed between them, but the gesture was clear enough. He wanted her to wait. Lúuna swayed slightly, her exhaustion threatening to overcome her last reserves of strength. The Apache man noticed and motioned to a young boy, who quickly brought a clay bowl of water dot when he offered it to her. Lúuna hesitated only a moment before accepting. The water was cool and tasted of minerals from deep within the earth. She drank slowly, remembering her father's warnings about drinking too quickly after deprivation. "Ahihi," the man said, the unfamiliar word hanging in the evening air between them. Lúuna lowered the bowl, uncertain whether she had just accepted some form of binding hospitality. "I don't understand," she whispered. The man touched his chest. "Kaagání," he said, the name carrying the rhythm of falling raindrops. "Kaagání," she repeated, the syllables foreign on her tongue. Then, mirroring his gesture, she touched her own chest. "Lúuna." An elderly woman emerged from the gathering crowd, her face a map of deep lines that spoke of decades under the desert sun. She wore her silver-streaked hair in a traditional style, adorned with small beads that clicked softly as she approached. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of one accustomed to being heard. The exchange between the old woman and Kaagání was brief but intense. Lúuna caught the hunter glancing her way several times as he responded, his hand occasionally moving to the eagle feather once more, some kind of talisman, she guessed. Finally, the old woman approached Lúuna directly, studying her with eyes that seemed to see beyond her physical state. After a long moment, she nodded once and turned to the others, speaking rapidly. The tension in the camp eased slightly, though suspicious glances still followed Lúuna's every movement. Kaagání gestured for Lúuna to follow him. With no other choice, she did so, acutely aware of how the remnants of her once fine dress contrasted with the practical leather garments of the Apache women. He led her to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp and indicated she should enter. Inside, clean furs lined the floor, and a small fire pit in the center had been prepared but not lit. It was sparse by the standards of her former life, but to Lúuna's exhausted body, it looked like a palace. She turned to thank him, but Kaagání was already backing away, leaving her to the blessed privacy of four walls, however temporary they might be. Only when he had gone did Lúuna allow her legs to buckle. She sank onto the furs, her body shaking with a release of tension she hadn't permitted herself during her desperate flight. No tears came, those had dried up with her other bodily fluids during her days in the desert, but her chest heaved, with silent sobs nonetheless. Outside, she could hear the camp settling for the night. Soft conversations in that unfamiliar language, the occasional laugh, domestic sounds that seemed impossibly normal after the horror she had witnessed. What would tomorrow bring? Had she traded one form of captivity for another, or had she found genuine sanctuary? As sleep finally claimed her, Luna's hand closed around the silver locket at her throat. In her dreams, her mother's painted eyes came to life, watching her with a mixture of sorrow and hope from within their silver prison. And beyond those beloved features, a new face formed in the darkness of her unconscious mind, a face with obsidian eyes and an eagle feather that danced in the desert wind. Dawn arrived with unfamiliar sounds, rhythmic grinding of stone against stone, women's voices in conversation, children's laughter. Lúuna sat up, momentarily disoriented by the conical walls of the wickiup. The events of yesterday rushed back, and with them came the realization that she had slept deeply for the first time since the raid. A shadow fell across the entrance. The old woman from the previous evening ducked inside, carrying a clay water bowl more intricately decorated than the one Lúuna had drunk from last night. She set it down and gestured for Lúuna to use it. "Two," the woman said, pointing to the water. "Two," Lúuna repeated, grateful for this small gift of language. The old woman nodded, then touched her own chest. "Nijoni." "Nijoni," Lúuna echoed, understanding this was the woman's name. Its sound had a musical quality that matched the elder's dignified bearing. Nijoni watched as Lúuna washed her face and hands with the cool water, then gestured for her to follow. Outside, the camp was fully alive with morning activities. Women worked at cooking fires or scraped hides stretched on wooden frames. Children darted between wickiups, engaged in some game involving small painted stones. Several men sat in a circle, fashioning arrows with meticulous care. Kaagání was nowhere to be seen. Nijoni led Lúuna to a fire where corn cakes cooked on heated stones. With practiced movements, she flipped one onto a wooden plate and offered it to Lúuna, who accepted with a grateful nod. The cake was unlike the bread she was accustomed to denser, and with a smoky flavor that spoke of open fires and ancient traditions. As she ate, Lúuna observed the women's sidelong glances. Their expressions ranged from open curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. One young woman, heavily pregnant, made a gesture that appeared protective, touching her swollen belly while looking deliberately away from Lúuna. A small child, perhaps 5 years old, approached boldly where adults maintained their distance. He stared at Lúuna's torn dress with undisguised fascination, reaching out to touch the lace at her sleeve. "Shiazi," Nijoni called, her tone gentle but firm. The boy reluctantly withdrew his hand, but remained standing before Lúuna, his dark eyes wide with curiosity. Lúuna smiled at him, the expression feeling strange on her face after so many days of fear. She broke off a small piece of her corn cake and offered it to him. The boy accepted it solemnly before darting away to show his prize to a group of watching children. "Ahihi," Nijoni said, nodding approvingly. "Thank you," Lúuna guessed. Recognizing the word from Kaagání the night before, the old woman's eyes crinkled. "Yeah," she corrected, pronouncing it slowly. "Ahihi," Lúuna tried again, earning a nod. A stir ran through the camp as several men returned from what must have been an early morning hunting party. Kaagání walked at their head, his bow slung across his back. When his eyes found Lúuna sitting with his grandmother, something flickered across his stoic features. Assessment, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of her continued presence. Nijoni called out to him, and he approached, his stride purposeful but unhurried. Up close, Lúuna could see the fine dust of the trail on his buckskin leggings and the perspiration that dampened his hair at the temples. He carried the scent of sage and open spaces. The grandmother and grandson exchanged words too rapid for Lúuna to catch. She heard her own name mentioned once, followed by a phrase that made Kaagání glance at her torn dress with a slight frown. When their conversation ended, Nijoni turned to Lúuna with a decisive nod. "Come," she said, the English word startling in its clarity. She pointed to Lúuna, then to herself and several other women who were beginning to gather nearby. "Work, learn, And so began Lúna's first day among the Apache, marked not by the captivity she had feared, but by the simple rhythms of a people who had survived in this harsh land for generations. A people whose ways were foreign to her, but whose humanity was as familiar as her own heartbeat. By midday, Lúna's hands were stained with the juice of unfamiliar berries that the women had shown her how to crush for dye. Though the work was simple, the concentration required had been a blessing. It left little room for memories to intrude. She had learned a handful of words: Sheil for plant, Dib for sheep, and Nald Lucy for things that crawled. Each new word felt like a small victory. The camp stirred with renewed energy as hunting parties returned one by one. The women abandoned their tasks, moving with purpose toward the central clearing. Nijani beckoned for Lúuna to follow. Kaagání and 2 other men approached from the eastern trail, a freshly killed deer slung between them. The animal's hide gleamed in the afternoon sun, a testament to a clean, skilled kill. As they laid their prize on a prepared area of flat stones, Lúuna noticed how other tribe members regarded Kaagání with a mixture of respect and deference. He was no ordinary hunter. Nijani spoke rapidly to the gathered women, assigning tasks with the efficiency of one long accustomed to leadership. Knives appeared, and the butchering began with practiced movements that spoke of generations of tradition. Lúuna stood awkwardly at the periphery, uncertain of her place in this ritual. The women worked with the deer hide first, carefully separating it from the flesh beneath. Their movements were methodical yet reverent, suggesting that nothing of the animal would be wasted. Gathering her courage, Lúuna approached Nijani and gestured toward the workers. "May I help?" she asked, knowing the words wouldn't be understood, but hoping her intent was clear. The old woman studied her for a moment, then handed her a small bone tool. She demonstrated a scraping motion against a section of the hide and nodded for Lúuna to continue. The work was harder than it looked. Lúna's soft hands, unaccustomed to such labor, quickly developed blisters. She ignored the pain, determined to prove her willingness to contribute. Occasionally, she glanced up to find Kaagání watching her, his expression unreadable. When the meat had been properly prepared, portions were distributed throughout the camp. Nijani received a choice: cut, which she divided, offering a share to Lúuna. The gesture did not go unnoticed by the others. Some nodded approvingly, while others frowned at this inclusion of an outsider in their bounty dot. As twilight approached, fires were lit throughout the camp. The central fire grew largest, and around it gathered the entire tribe. Lúuna sat beside Nijani, acutely aware of her otherness, yet strangely comforted by the old woman's steady presence. Kaagání took a place across the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across his angular features. When an elder began to speak, a hush fell over the gathering. Though Lúuna couldn't understand the words, she recognized the cadence of storytelling, the rise and fall of voice, the strategic pauses, the occasional gestures that punctuated important points. The tribe responded with murmurs and nods at appropriate moments. Children leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder or fear, depending on the tone. Here was history being passed down, lessons being imparted, culture being preserved through the simplest yet most profound of human activities. Sharing of stories. When the tale concluded, several men brought out drums. The rhythmic beating began slowly, then quickened, joined by voices raised in song. Some women rose to dance, their movements telling stories of their own, of hunts and harvests, of birth and death, of the eternal cycle that governed their lives. Lúuna felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find Nijani offering her a small bundle. Unwrapping it, she discovered a simple leather garment, a dress similar to those worn by the Apache women. The old woman pointed to Lúna's torn lace dress, and then to the wickiup, her meaning clear. Go change. In the privacy of the small dwelling, Lúuna removed the last physical connection to her former life. The lace dress, once a symbol of her place in society, now seemed as alien as she felt among these people. She slipped on the leather garment, surprised by its softness against her skin. When she emerged, the drumming momentarily faltered as eyes turned to assess her transformation. Nijoni nodded approvingly, and though Kaagání's expression remained impassive, his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary before returning to the fire. Dawn broke with a crimson intensity that painted the eastern sky. Lúuna stood outside her wickiup, the leather dress still strange against her skin, but infinitely more practical than her tattered lace garment. She had slept deeply again, the exhaustion of physical labor proving a more effective remedy for nightmares than fear ever could. A movement caught her eye. Kaagání emerging from his dwelling, bow in hand. He nodded briefly in her direction, then gestured for her to follow. Lúuna hesitated only a moment before complying. Curious about this unexpected invitation, he led her to the edge of camp where the desert stretched before them, already warming under the early sun. Kneeling, he pointed to a set of small tracks in the sand. "Jabalina," he said, tracing the outline with his finger. "Jabalina," Lúuna repeated, recognizing the Spanish-derived word for javelina, the wild desert pig. Kaagání glanced up, surprise briefly crossing his features at her understanding. He moved a few paces forward and indicated another set of tracks, these more delicate. "Mossy," he said. "Mossy," she echoed. "Rabbit?" He nodded, a hint of approval in his dark eyes. Rising, he continued along the desert floor, pointing out various tracks and signs, disturbed pebbles indicating a snake's passage, the almost invisible trail of a lizard, droppings that revealed a coyote had passed through before dawn. With each identification, Lúuna found the pattern of their exchange becoming more natural. He would name, she would repeat, and occasionally she would offer the English or Spanish equivalent. Some he seemed to recognize, nodding slightly. Others were met with a blank look that suggested the word was as foreign to him as his language was to her. When they reached a small cluster of desert plants, Kaagání knelt again, indicating a spiny cactus with red fruit crowning its top. "Shiil," he said, using the general word for plant she had learned yesterday. Then he touched the fruit specifically. "Hosh." "Prickly pear," Lúuna offered, recognizing the fruit her mother had occasionally used for preserves. Kaagání carefully harvested several of the fruits, showing her how to avoid the nearly invisible spines. He demonstrated a technique for removing the outer skin, then offered her the sweet flesh inside. The taste was familiar, yet different, sweeter than she remembered. Perhaps because of the particular soil here, or the direct harvesting method. As they ate, Kaagání pointed to other edible plants. Wild onions, mesquite pods that could be ground into flour, herbs that added flavor to stews. "My mother grew vegetables," Lúuna said, knowing he wouldn't understand the words, but feeling a sudden need to share something of herself. "Carrots, beans, tomatoes." She made digging and planting gestures. Kaagání watched her pantomime with intense focus and nodded. "Nijoni," he said, pointing back toward camp, and then mimicking her planting gesture. His grandmother grew gardens, too. This small connection between their worlds made Lúuna smile, a genuine expression that felt foreign on her face after so much grief. They continued their circuit around the camp's perimeter, the language lesson expanding to include directions, weather terms, and basic commands. By the time they returned, the sun was high, and Lúuna's mind was saturated with new words, a different kind of fullness than the hollow emptiness that had accompanied her since the raid. In the camp, women worked at grinding stones, crushing seeds and dried corn into meal. Nijoni beckoned Lúuna over, patting the ground beside her. She demonstrated the proper motion for using the stone tools, forward pushing with both hands that required strength and rhythm. Lúuna's first attempts were clumsy, earning amused glances from the younger women. But Nijoni nodded encouragingly, adjusting Lúuna's grip and the angle of her arms. Gradually, she found the rhythm, the repetitive motion becoming almost meditative as she worked. Lúuna noticed something unexpected. The stares from the other women had changed subtly. There was still wariness, still curiosity, but the open hostility had diminished. Her willingness to learn, to work, to adapt these, seemed to speak a language that transcended words. By late afternoon, when her arms ached from the unaccustomed labor, Lúuna had contributed a small but significant pile of ground meal to the communal stores. Nijoni patted her shoulder, her weathered face crinkling in a smile. "Nijao," the old woman said. "Good." The scream tore through the night, startling birds from nearby trees and sending a ripple of alarm through the sleeping camp. It took Lúuna several moments to realize the sound had come from her own throat, ripped from the depths of a nightmare so vivid she could still smell the smoke of her burning home. She sat upright, heart pounding, the silver locket clutched so tightly in her palm that its edges bit into her flesh. Outside, voices murmured in concerned tones. A shadow appeared at the entrance to her wiki-up Kaagání, alert and watchful, his knife drawn against potential threats. When he saw Lúuna alone, trembling but unharmed, he lowered the weapon. Their eyes met in the dim moonlight filtering through the dwelling's smoke hole. The question in his gaze required no translation. "Bad dream," Lúuna whispered, knowing he wouldn't understand the words, but hoping her tone would convey their meaning. She touched her head, then made a distressed gesture. Kaagání nodded slowly. He hesitated at the threshold, then entered and sat cross-legged near the entrance, a respectful distance from her sleeping furs. He made no move to touch her, asked no questions, offered no platitudes. He simply sat, a quiet presence in the darkness, as though standing guard against the shadows in her mind. More footsteps approached Nijoni, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, carrying a small clay pot that released tendrils of fragrant steam. She entered, nodding to her grandson, before kneeling beside Lúuna. The old woman offered the vessel, encouraging Lúuna to drink with gentle gestures. The liquid was bitter yet soothing, warming Lúuna from within as it traveled down her throat. Herbs, she guessed, recognizing the medicinal quality, though not the specific ingredients. With the tea warming her hands and Nijoni's solid presence beside her, Lúuna found words spilling forth, despite knowing they wouldn't be understood. "They came at dusk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "6 men on horseback. My father tried to stop them, but her voice broke. My mother hid me and my brother in the root cellar, but they found him when he cried out." The telling brought fresh pain, yet somehow less sharp than before, as though speaking the horror aloud, even to uncomprehending ears, diminished its power. Through it all, Kaagání remained silent, his stillness not that of discomfort, but of respect, allowing her grief its voice without interruption. When she finally fell silent, Nijoni took the empty cup from Lúuna's hands and reached for the silver locket still clutched in her palm. Gently, she uncurled Lúuna's fingers and examined the piece, her weathered thumb tracing the intricate engravings on its surface. "Open?" she asked, the English word clearly part of a limited vocabulary shared with traders or settlers. Lúuna nodded, releasing the catch that revealed her mother's portrait. Nijoni studied the tiny painting with evident interest, then looked at Lúuna's face, apparently noting the resemblance. "Mother," Lúuna said, touching the portrait, and then her own heart. "Shima," Nijoni replied, making the same gesture. "Mother." Kaagání moved closer, looking at the locket with quiet intensity. When his eyes met Lúuna's, something had changed in their depths, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience. He touched his chest. "Shima, Shiji, mother, father." Then he drew his hand across his throat in a universal gesture of death. "Your parents too?" Lúuna asked, understanding dawning. He nodded once. his face revealing nothing yet somehow expressing everything. As the night deepened around them, a fragile bridge formed between their worlds, not built of shared language or custom, but of the universal experience of loss. Nejoni began to hum softly, a melody that required no translation. Its gentle cadence spoke of sorrow, acknowledged, and pain honored, yet it carried an undercurrent of strength, of survival. Despite devastation, when dawn's first light touched the eastern horizon, Kaagání rose silently and moved to the entrance. There he paused, looking back at Lúuna with an expression that, while still reserved, held a new element invitation. "Hey, Eka," he said, gesturing toward the lightning sky. "Prayer?" Lúuna guessed, recognizing something ritualistic in his manner. He extended his hand, palm up, not demanding, merely offering. After a moment's hesitation, Lúuna accepted, allowing him to lead her into the cool morning air where the day's first ceremony awaited. The dawn prayer concluded with Kaagání facing east, arms raised to the golden light spilling over the horizon. Lúuna had stood slightly behind him, mirroring his movements as best she could, uncertain of the words, but finding comfort in their rhythm. As they walked back toward camp, he paused to gather yucca fibers from a mature plant, demonstrating how to select only certain strands without harming the plant's growth. Lúuna's fingers, still clumsy with this unfamiliar work, nevertheless managed to collect a small bundle. "Tubu," Kaagání said, holding up the fibers. "Tubalu," she repeated, tucking the word into her growing vocabulary. Instead of returning directly to the camp, he led her along a narrow trail that wound through mesquite and creosote. The morning air still held coolness, and desert creatures scurried about their business before the heat of day drove them to shelter. Kaagání moved with a confidence born of intimate knowledge, pausing occasionally to point out subtle signs. Most eyes would miss a depression in sand, showing where a creature had rested. Scratches on bark revealing a cat had sharpened its claws. A particular arrangement of stones that Lúuna gradually realized was not natural, but a marker left by another Apache. "Tay," he said suddenly, freezing in mid-stride and raising one hand in a signal to halt. Lúuna stopped, following his gaze to what appeared to be an unremarkable patch of desert. He crouched, indicating she should do the same, then pointed to a thin, nearly invisible line across the sand. "Tudibioish," he whispered. "Snake. Now she saw a diamondback rattlesnake, perfectly camouflaged against the desert floor, its body forming subtle curves that her untrained eye had mistaken for natural contours of the land." Kaagání reached slowly for a stick, then with a swift, precise movement, pinned the snake behind its head. In another fluid motion, he gripped it just below the jaw, holding it securely as it writhed in protest. Lúuna gasped, expecting him to kill it. Instead, he studied it with what appeared to be respect, then carefully placed it in a small hide pouch at his belt. "Medicine," he said, using another word she recognized from traders. He touched his chest, then mimicked someone breathing with difficulty. "Help sick." She nodded, understanding that the snake, its venom, or perhaps other parts, served medicinal purposes. Her own mother had used plants for healing, but never something as dangerous as a rattlesnake. The thought brought a pang of memory, but not the crushing grief of before. They continued their circuit, gathering various plants and materials resin. From trees, certain stones, feathers shed by birds. Kaagání named each item, sometimes explaining its use through gestures. Lúuna found herself remembering not just the Apache words, but also recalling equivalent plants her mother had used for similar purposes. "This," she said, holding up a particular yellow flower, "my mother used for fever." She touched her forehead and mimicked heat radiating from it. Kaagání nodded, recognition in his eyes. "Fever," he repeated, the English word clumsy on his tongue. Then he gave the Apache name, Shield Delini. By midday, they had completed a wide circle around the camp, and returned with their gathered materials. Several women looked up from their work, nodding acknowledgment to Kaagání, before their eyes settled curiously on Lúuna and the bundle she carried. Nijoni appeared, examining their harvest with approving hands. She spoke rapidly to her grandson, who responded with the economy of words that seemed his nature. The old woman then turned to Lúuna, gesturing toward the yucca fibers. "Make," she said in English, then demonstrated a weaving motion. Under Nijoni's patient instruction, Lúuna spent the afternoon learning to weave a simple basket from the yucca fibers. The work was precise, requiring focus that kept her mind anchored in the present rather than drifting to painful memories. Her first attempts were clumsy, the weave uneven and loose, but Nijoni merely undid the work and guided her through the proper technique again. Several young girls gathered too, giggling behind their hands at Lúuna's mistakes, but falling silent when Nijoni spoke sharply to them. One, braver than the others, moved closer to demonstrate her own technique, her small brown hands moving with surprising dexterity. "Ahihi," Lúuna thanked her, earning a shy smile. By sunset, she had completed a small, imperfect basket. Nijoni inspected it with critical eyes, but gave a nod that felt like high praise from the exacting elder. Taking the basket, Lúuna presented it to the old woman with a formal gesture that felt appropriate to the moment. Nijoni accepted with equal formality, then smiled a genuine expression that transformed her weathered face. From across the camp, Kaagání watched the exchange, and for the first time, Lúuna saw what might have been the ghost of a smile touch his lips as well. A week passed, each day adding new words to Lúuna's vocabulary and new skills to her hands. The suspicious glances from tribe members had largely given way to acceptance, if not yet friendship. She had proven herself willing to work, quick to learn, and respectful of their ways. On the 8th morning, Lúuna awoke to an unusual stillness. The typical sounds of camp activity were muted, replaced by a tense quiet. She emerged from her wickiup to find people looking eastward, where dark clouds massed on the horizon. "Niltsa," a passing woman said, pointing to the threatening sky. "Storm." Nijoni approached, concern etched on her face. She spoke rapidly to Lúuna, who caught only fragments, something about securing the camp. The old woman pressed a leather cord into her hands, then pointed to the edges of nearby wickiups, where similar cords reinforced the structures against wind. Understanding dawned. A desert storm was approaching, and everyone was preparing. Lúuna moved quickly to help, using the cord to strengthen her own dwelling before assisting others. Women gathered children and secured loose items, while men reinforced the larger community structures. Kaagání appeared at midday, leading a small hunting party back earlier than usual. Their expressions were grim as they eyed the approaching clouds, now tinged with an ominous green-gray hue. He spoke briefly with tribal elders, then sought out Lúuna and Nijoni. "Come," he said to Lúuna in English, gesturing toward a stand of trees beyond the camp's edge. "Need medicine plants before rain." Nijoni nodded approval, and Lúuna followed him without hesitation. They moved swiftly across the desert floor, the wind beginning to pick up around them, carrying the electric scent of approaching rain. In the shelter of the trees, Kaagání pointed out several plants with small white flowers. "Shiel hatal," he explained as they gathered the specimens. "Storm medicine." The sky darkened rapidly, and thunder rumbled in the distance. As they worked, fat raindrops began to spatter the dust around them, leaving dark spots that quickly multiplied. Kaagání glanced up, his expression sharpening. "Tonayal," he said urgently. "Water wind, come." They gathered the last of the plants and turned back toward camp, but had covered less than half the distance when the storm hit with full force. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and lightning split the sky with brilliant forks that left after images on Lúuna's vision. The wind howled, driving the rain sideways and making forward progress nearly impossible. Kaagání seized her hand, pulling her toward an outcropping of rocks where a small cave offered shelter. Inside, they shook water from their hair and clothing, listening to the storm's fury just beyond the entrance. "Binejida," Kaagání said, watching the lightning dance across the sky. His voice held not fear but reverence. "Thunder spirit?" Lúuna guessed, recognizing the tone used for sacred things. He nodded, then touched his chest and made a gesture encompassing the storm outside. "Apache," he said, a rare use of his people's name as known to outsiders. "Children of storm." The simple statement contained volumes pride in identity, connection to natural forces, a worldview that saw meaning and kinship in the elements others might only fear. Lúuna felt privileged to glimpse this aspect of his heritage. As they waited out the storm's fury, Kaagání unexpectedly began to speak, his improved English interspersed with Apache words. He told of storms that brought life-giving water to the desert, of lightning that sparked fire to renew the land, of his people's long history of finding strength in nature's power rather than cowering before it. Lúuna listened, mesmerized not just by the content, but by this unprecedented openness from the typically reserved man. When he asked about her people's view of storms, she found herself sharing memories of her father's farm, the anxious watching of clouds during growing season, the prayers for gentle rain rather than destructive deluge, the celebration when crops survived a threatening storm. "Different ways," Kaagání observed when she finished. "Same sky." The simple philosophy struck Lúuna with unexpected force. Different ways, same sky perhaps that applied to more than just weather. Two people from worlds that had been in conflict, finding common ground in shared experience. When the storm finally abated, they emerged to find a transformed landscape. Water pooled in depressions, creating temporary ponds where before there had been only dust. A lightning struck. Tree smoldered nearby, its trunk split and blackened. Kaagání approached it respectfully, gathering several pieces of the charred wood. "Sacred," he explained, touched by Binejida. As they walked back toward camp, Lúuna realized something had shifted between them, not dramatically, but significantly. The storm had washed away some invisible barrier, leaving in its place a tentative bridge of understanding. 2 weeks after the storm, the rhythm of Lúuna's days had acquired a comforting familiarity. She rose with the sun for morning prayers, worked alongside the women gathering food and preparing meals, and spent afternoons learning crafts from Nijoni or tracking skills from Kaagání. Nights brought stories around the fire, more comprehensible. Now, as her grasp of the language improved, the alarm came at dusk. A lone rider approached from the west, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. The camp mobilized instantly, women gathering children, men reaching for weapons. Kaagání moved to the front of those assembling to meet the newcomer. Lúuna recognized the visitor as Apache, but from a different band than Kaagány's people. He carried a quiver of arrows decorated differently than those of this tribe, and, most tellingly, a single arrow with distinctive red and black bands painted on its shaft, a message arrow. The messenger spoke rapidly, his hands moving in emphatic gestures. Though Lúuna couldn't follow all his words, certain terms stood out with chilling clarity. Nada calloused, marauders. Bill, weapons, gaudy attack. Kaagány's expression hardened as he listened, his hand unconsciously moving to the knife at his belt. When the messenger finished, the camp erupted in voices, some advocating immediate relocation, others arguing for preparation to defend their territory. Nijoni appeared at Lúuna's side, her weathered face grave. "Bad men," she said in English, ensuring Lúuna understood. "Come from south. Attack Tonto band. Maybe come here?" Lúuna's blood ran cold. What kind of men? What did they look like? The old woman conferred briefly with the messenger, then turned back to Lúuna. 6 men, white and Mexican, horses, many guns. 6 men, the same number that had destroyed Lúuna's home and family. Her hands began to tremble, and she pressed them against her leather dress to still them. "They killed my family," she said, the words strangled. "My people." Nijoni's eyes widened with understanding. She took Lúuna's arm and led her directly to where Kaagání stood with the tribal elders, still deep in discussion. Without ceremony, the old woman interrupted, speaking rapid Apache and gesturing toward Lúuna. All eyes turned to her. Kaagání addressed her directly, his English careful but clear. "These men who come, you know them?" Lúuna nodded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "They attacked my settlement, killed my family, burned our homes. I escaped, but no one else did." A murmur ran through the gathered Apache. The messenger studied her with new interest, asking a question that Nijoni translated. "How many guns? What kind?" Drawing a deep breath, Lúuna focused on providing useful information rather than succumbing to fear. 6 men, 4 rifles, long guns, 2 pistols, all had knives. Their leader, she paused, the image of the man rising unbidden. In her memory, has a scar across his cheek here. She traced a line from her right eye to her jaw. "They attack at dusk, when people are tired from the day's work, but before full dark." As she spoke, Kaagání translated for those who didn't understand English. The strategic value of her knowledge was immediately apparent. Heads nodded, and the tone of the discussion shifted from alarm to focused planning. An elder spoke, gesturing toward Lúuna and then to the tribal council fire. Kaagání turned to her. "He says you should join council, help plan." The significance of this invitation wasn't lost on Lúuna. For a woman and an outsider to be included in a tribal council was unprecedented. It spoke volumes about both the seriousness of the threat and the value they placed on her information as darkness fell completely. The council fire was built up, and the tribe's defenders gathered around it. Maps were drawn in the dirt, showing the camp's location and the surrounding terrain. Strategy was debated, with Lúuna contributing what she knew of the marauders' tactics. When the council concluded, decisions had been made. Scouts would be posted in wider circles than usual. Women, children, and elders would prepare for possible evacuation to caves in the nearby mountains. Warriors would ready defenses while appearing to maintain normal routines to avoid alerting any watching eyes as the gathering dispersed. Kaagání approached Lúuna, the message arrow in his hand. He offered it to her, a gesture whose significance she didn't fully understand, but sensed was important. "You warned us," he said simply. "Now you defend with us." Lúuna accepted the arrow, feeling its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. In her hands, it represented not just danger, but belonging. For the first time since fleeing her destroyed home, she felt the stirring of something she'd thought forever lost: purpose. Dawn arrived with a tense stillness hanging over the camp. Children were kept close, their usual play subdued under their mother's watchful eyes. Warriors moved with purposeful efficiency, checking weapons and reinforcing defenses while maintaining an outward appearance of routine. Kaagání found Lúuna as she finished her morning meal. Without preamble, he handed her a bow smaller than his own, crafted for her height and strength, its surface smooth from careful shaping. "Today you learn," he said simply. Lúuna ran her fingers along the weapons curve, feeling the tension in the wood, a promise of power waiting to be released. This was not the crude implement she had expected for a beginner, but a finely crafted tool made with evident care. The craftsmanship spoke of hours of work, of knowledge passed through generations. "You made this?" she asked, looking up at him. He nodded once. "For you." The implication was clear. He had begun crafting this bow before the warning came, intending all along to teach her this fundamental Apache skill. The realization warmed something deep within her. They walked to a clearing just beyond the camp's edge. where several targets had been arranged at varying distances, hide wrapped bundles of grass mounted on stakes. Kaagání positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance with impersonal efficiency. "Stand like mountain," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear as he aligned her shoulders. Feet rooted, chest open. His hands guided hers on the bow, showing her how to knock. An arrow, how to draw the string back to her cheek, how to sight along the shaft toward the target. The physical proximity should have made her uncomfortable, yet it didn't. His touch was that of a teacher, respectful and practical. "Breathe out," he said, "then release." Lúuna exhaled and let the arrow fly. It fell short of the target, embedding itself in the earth with a disappointing thud. She reached for another arrow, determined to improve, but Kaagání stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "First shot never hits," he said. "Not important. What matters? What did you feel?" The question surprised her. In her world, results were what counted, not feelings. Yet she considered his query seriously. "I felt ... connected. To the bow, to the arrow, to the target." He nodded, satisfaction in his dark eyes. "Bow is not weapon only, is path between hunter and prey, between warrior and enemy, between spirit and purpose." Throughout the morning, he guided her practice with patience that never wavered despite her many misses. Gradually, her arrows began to fly truer, occasionally striking the outer edges of the targets. With each small success, Kaagání offered not effusive praise, but quiet acknowledgement, a nod, a brief "good." The corner of his mouth lifting slightly. By midday, Lúuna's arms ached and blisters had formed on her fingers. When she finally hit near the center of a target, she turned to Kaagání with undisguised pride. To her surprise, he didn't acknowledge the shot. Instead, he pointed to her blistered hands. "Pain teaches," he said, "but too much pain stops learning." From a pouch at his belt, he produced a small container of sava mixture of beeswax and herbs she recognized from their gathering expeditions. With methodical care, he applied it to her raw skin. Tomorrow, hands stronger. Today, enough. As they walked back toward camp, several young Apache boys watched Lúuna with new interest, their eyes moving from her bow to the visible target behind her with its embedded arrows. One boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, approached hesitantly. "Nte, nejoni," he said, pointing to her bow. "Good shooting." "Ahihi," Lúuna thanked him, touched by the child's approval. Kaagán watched the exchange with that ghost of a smile she had come to recognize as genuine pleasure. As they continued toward the camp, he explained the spiritual aspects of Apache archery, how a well-made bow carried the maker's prayers, how arrows were believed to fly not just with physical force, but with the archer's intent. "My father taught me bow is living thing," he said. "Wood remembers tree it came from. String remembers animal that gave sinew. Arrow remembers bird that gave feathers. All remember earth that grew them. When you shoot, you join this memory." The concept resonated with Lúuna in ways she hadn't expected. Her own father had taught her to respect the tools of survival, but never with this depth of connection to the materials themselves. She looked at the bow in her hands with new appreciation for the philosophy behind its creation. That evening, she noticed calluses beginning to form where blisters had been small transformations in her flesh that mirrored larger changes within her spirit. She was becoming something new, yet paradoxically, something that felt increasingly authentic. 5 days of archery practice had transformed Lúuna's hands. Calluses replaced blisters, and muscles that had once protested now moved with fluid memory. Her arrows found their targets with increasing frequency, though not yet with the consistent precision of the Apache warriors. At dawn on the 6th day, Kaagání approached as she prepared for her morning practice. "Today you hunt," he said, his tone making it not a question but a statement of fact. Lúuna felt a flutter of both excitement and apprehension. Target practice was one thing. Taking the life of an animal was another. Yet she understood the necessity. The tribe needed food, especially with the threat of attack requiring extra strength and alertness. Nijoni peered with a small pouch of ochre powder. With practiced movements, she applied it to Lúuna's face in specific patterns, marks of a hunter going to seek prey. The ritual application felt solemn, significant, an honor Lúuna had not expected to receive. The hunting party consisted of Kaagání, 2 other warriors, and now Lúuna the only woman. They moved out before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, walking in single file and in near silence. The men carried their bows strung and ready, arrows and quivers on their backs. Lúuna mimicked their preparedness, hyper-aware of being the novice among experts. 2 hours into their trek, Kaagání halted the group with a raised hand. He knelt, examining marks in the soil that Lúuna would have missed entirely. He looked up, pointing to a distant ridge where a stand of juniper trees provided the only significant vegetation. "Mule deer," he whispered. 3, female with young ones. The hunters conferred briefly, then separated, moving to encircle the area where the deer were likely feeding. Kaagání gestured for Lúuna to follow him. They approached from downwind, using the terrain for cover, advancing with painstaking slowness that tested Lúuna's patience, but which she understood was essential. When they reached the edge of the juniper stand, Kaagání motioned for her to stop. Through the branches, Lúuna could now see their quarry, a doe and 2 nearly grown fawns, grazing peacefully in the morning light. The animals were beautiful, their movements graceful and alert, ears constantly swiveling to detect danger. Kaagání silently nocked an arrow, but didn't raise his bow. Instead, he indicated that Lúuna should prepare to shoot. Her heart hammered in her chest as she selected an arrow and fitted it to her bowstring. The deer were perhaps 30 yards away, a challenging but not impossible distance given her recent practice. Before she could draw, Kaagání touched her arm. He mimed a breathing exercise they had practiced, reminding her to center herself. Then he pointed to the largest of the 3 deer and nodded once. Lúuna inhaled deeply, drawing back the bowstring as she exhaled. The world narrowed to just her, the bow, and the deer. She recalled Kaagány's teachings: feel the connection to the animal, acknowledge its sacrifice, send the arrow with purpose and respect. She released. The arrow flew true, striking the deer in the chest near the heart. The animal leaped and staggered, taking several more steps before collapsing. The other deer bounded away, disappearing into the brush with startling speed. A complex mixture of emotions washed over Lúuna's satisfaction at the clean shot, sorrow for the life taken, and a profound sense of having crossed some threshold. Kaagány's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present moment. His eyes held approval, but also something deeper recognition of the weight of what she had just experienced. They approached the fallen deer together. Kaagání knelt beside it, speaking words in Apache that Lúuna now recognized as a prayer of thanks to the animal's spirit. He drew his knife and handed it to her, handle first. "First blood, first cut," he said quietly, understanding the honor being bestowed. Lúuna accepted the knife and made the initial incision as he had taught her during previous hunts she had observed. The other hunters arrived as she worked, nodding approval at her kill and her technique. The field dressing was efficient, with each hunter knowing their role. Nothing usable was wasted meat, hide, sinew. Even certain organs were carefully preserved for the return journey. Throughout the process, there was a reverence that transformed what might have been merely butchery into something approaching ceremony. When they had finished, Kaagání removed a small leather pouch from his belt. From it, he took a carved bone, bead, and a thin leather cord. With solemn movements, he threaded the bead onto the cord, then tied it around Lúuna's wrist. "First kill," he explained. "Hunter now." The simple necklace represented more than just a successful hunt. It symbolized Lúuna's growing place within the tribe, no longer merely a tolerated outsider, but a contributor to their survival. As they began the journey back to camp, her deer carried between two warriors on a pole. She touched the bead at her wrist and felt a sense of belonging she had thought forever lost. The return of the hunting party with Lúuna's deer had been cause for celebration, her transition from outsider to provider, marked by a small ceremony and extra portions of the meat shared among the tribal elders. That night, for the first time, she had been invited to sit among the hunters, rather than with the women during the evening meal dot, but the sense of accomplishment faded quickly the following day when scouts returned with grim news. The marauders had attacked another settlement, this one closer than the last. They were moving methodically through the territory, leaving destruction in their wake. The tribal council gathered immediately. Lúuna, again included due to her knowledge of the attackers, sat beside Kaagání as reports were shared. The pattern was becoming clear. The 6 men targeted isolated homesteads and small settlements, taking what they wanted and burning what remained. They showed no mercy to those who resisted and little enough to those who didn't dot an elder warrior. With gray streaks in his long hair, spoke at length, his words passionate. Though Lúuna couldn't follow everything, the thrust was clear. He advocated for immediate relocation to more defensible territory in the mountains. Kaagání listened respectfully before responding. His counter-argument emphasized the camp's current strategic advantages, knowledge of the surrounding terrain, established escape routes, and the psychological edge of defending familiar ground. Better to stand firm with careful preparation than to be caught vulnerable during transit. The debate continued as afternoon shadows lengthened. Opinion divided roughly along generational lines, younger warriors supporting Kaagány's stance, older members favoring retreat. As darkness fell, a compromise emerged. The most vulnerable small children, pregnant women, and the elderly would be escorted to mountain caves while the main camp prepared defenses. After the council dispersed, Lúuna followed Kaagání to the edge of camp, where he stood gazing southward, as though his eyes could pierce the miles of darkness to locate their enemies. "Will they come here?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Question is when, not if." "Because of me?" The thought had been haunting her, that her presence might have somehow drawn these men to the Apache camp. Kaagání turned to her, his expression softening slightly in the moonlight. "No, they hunt all people, Apache, white, Mexican. They are like coyotes who have tasted human blood. They do not stop." His certainty was oddly comforting. This wasn't her burden to bear alone. It was a shared threat to be faced together. Still, the familiar nightmare returned, that night flames, screams, the sickening copper scent of spilled blood. She woke gasping, the silver locket clutched in her fist. Sleep refused to return, so Lúuna stepped outside, finding the night air cool and still. To her surprise, Kaagání sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood with focused attention. He glanced up at her emergence, but didn't seem surprised. "Bad dreams again," he said. Not a question. She nodded, sinking down beside him. "I see them, the men who killed my family. Their leader watching me as I ran." She touched the locket at her throat. "I dream that I am still running, that I will always be running." Kaagány's hands stilled on his carving. "Fear is like smoke," he said after a long pause. "It blinds eyes, fills lungs, makes it hard to think. But smoke can be used, too, to signal, to preserve food, to keep away insects." He set aside his knife, meeting her gaze directly. "Your fear can make you run, or it can make you fight." The simple wisdom penetrated Lúuna's haze of anxiety. Fear as a tool rather than a master, the concept was foreign to her upbringing. It resonated with some deeper instinct. "I want to fight," she said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. Something flickered in Kaagání's eyes approval. Perhaps, or recognition. He reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew several small containers made of hollowed bone, each sealed with beeswax. Opening one, he revealed a deep red pigment. War paint, he explained. Made from earth that has drunk the blood of Apache warriors. Carries their courage. The significance wasn't lost on Lúuna. War paint was sacred, its application governed by tradition and ceremony. That he would show it to her, explain its meaning, suggested a level of trust she hadn't fully realized she'd earned. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Everything you know about fighting these men?" Kaagání studied her face in the moonlight, as though searching for something in her expression. Whatever he sought, he seemed to find it. He nodded once, decisively. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin." As dawn approached, they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars fade from the sky. The coming days would bring danger, perhaps death. Yet for the first time since fleeing her burning home, Lúuna felt not just the desperate will to survive, but the steadfast determination to prevail. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Children and elders departed for the mountain. Caves, escorted by several warriors, who would return once their charges were safely hidden. Those who remained transformed the camp into a defensive position, digging shallow trenches, positioning barriers of thorned brush at strategic points, stockpiling arrows and water. Kaagání worked with Lúuna intensively, honing her archery skills and teaching her the rudiments of knife fighting. She absorbed everything with determined focus, pushing through exhaustion and muscle pain. At night, she collapsed into dreamless sleep, too tired even for nightmares. On the 4th evening, Kaagání selected Lúuna to share his watch duty, a sign of trust that did not go unnoticed by the tribe. They positioned themselves on a small rise overlooking the most likely approach route, the nearly full moon providing ample light to spot any movement below. The night was quiet save for the occasional call of an owl or the distant yip of coyotes. After an hour of vigilant silence, Kaagání spoke unexpectedly. "Why did you come to Apache land?" Truth, the question startled Lúuna. She had assumed he understood her arrival had been born of desperation, not choice. "I had nowhere else to go," she answered simply. "My father always said Apache territory was dangerous, but the marauders were behind me. One chose the unknown danger over the certain one." He nodded slowly. "You expected to die." "Yes," she admitted. "Or worse, instead you found life." The observation, so direct yet profound, caught her off guard. He was right. She had come expecting death, but had found purpose, community, skills she never knew she possessed. She had found strength in herself that her former life had never demanded. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had lingered since that first night. "You could have killed me, or sent me away." Kaagání was silent for so long that Lúuna thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Many years ago, I had wife, Layli, and small daughter." His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, as though touching an old wound. "Soldiers came while I hunted, killed many, took others." The pain in his voice was raw, despite the passage of time. "When I returned, nothing. No one." Lúuna's heart constricted. "I'm sorry," she said, the words wholly inadequate for such loss. "I searched for them, found my daughter's body. Never found Lala." His jaw tightened. "Since then, I hunt alone, fight alone, live alone." The admission explained so much: his reserved nature, his solitary habits, the distance he maintained even among his own people. Yet it didn't explain her. "But why help me?" She pressed gently. Kaagání turned to face her directly, moonlight silvering his features. "When you came, I saw in your eyes what I carried in my heart. Ghost of dead family, weight of survival. He paused, seeming to search for words. I thought maybe, helping you heal, I heal too. The confession, delivered with such unadorned honesty, touched something deep within Lúuna. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand over his. He stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, allowing the contact. Has it worked? She asked softly. The healing? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Some. When you shot deer, when you weave basket, when you learn our ways, I see life returning. To you. Maybe to me also. They sat in silence then, her hand still resting on his, the simple touch bridging worlds of difference and pain. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. A soft footfall announced Nijoni's approach. The old woman carried a bundle wrapped in soft hide. She settled beside them without comment on their proximity or their joined hands. Unwrapping the bundle, she revealed a blanket of extraordinary beauty woven with intricate patterns of stars, and mountains in indigo, white, and deep ochre. She placed it around both their shoulders with deliberate movements. Star blanket, she explained to Lúuna, wedding gift for Kaagání and Lala, never used. Her weathered hands smoothed the fabric, waited for right time, right people. The significance was unmistakable. Nijoni was offering her blessing for whatever was growing between her grandson and this woman from another world. More than that, she was acknowledging that it was time for old grief to make way for new possibilities. Under the shared blanket, Kaagání's fingers tentatively interlaced with Lúuna's. Neither spoke words. Seemed superfluous beneath the vast desert sky where ancient spirits watched and perhaps nodded their own approval. Dawn broke with an ominous red hue that painted the landscape in blood-tinted light. Lúuna, who had finally retired from watch duty with Kaagání just hours before, woke to urgent voices outside her wickiup. She emerged to find the camp in. Controlled motion warriors checking weapons, women securing essential supplies, all moving with the practiced efficiency of those who had prepared for this moment. A scout had returned with news. Riders approaching from the south, 6 men matching the description of the marauders. They were perhaps 2 hours away, following the most direct route to the camp with a confidence that suggested either ignorance of the Apache presence or contempt for it. Kaagání found Lúuna as she was stringing her bow. Without preamble, he handed her a small leather pouch of war paint. Your choice, he said simply. Stay hidden with women who remain, or stand with warriors. Lúuna opened the pouch, rubbing the red ochre between her fingers. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than expected, yet she felt oddly calm. I stand with you, she said. He nodded once, neither approving nor disapproving, merely accepting her choice. From over his shoulder, he unstrapped a shield circular, made of hardened rawhide, with concentric rings painted in sacred patterns. At its center was a striking emblem of an eagle. My father's shield, he explained, offering it to her. Protected him in many battles, now protects you. The gift left Lúuna momentarily speechless. To be entrusted with such a significant family, artifact spoke volumes about Kaagání's feelings more eloquently than any words could have. I can't take this, she protested. It should be yours. I carry his knife, his bow, his spirit, Kaagání replied. You carry his shield, his protection. He placed it firmly in her hands. This is right. There was no time for further discussion. Warriors were taking positions according to their previously established plan, some concealed among rocks overlooking the main approach, others hidden in shallow trenches reinforced with brush. Archers, including Lúuna, were stationed behind. Barricades with clear fields of fire. Nijoni approached before Lúuna took her position. The old woman's face was solemn as she painted traditional protection symbols on Lúuna's forehead and cheeks with steady hands. Be strong, she said in English. Like mountain, be smart. Like fox, the waiting was the hardest part. Each minute stretched interminably as the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and intensifying the heat. Lúuna found herself running through scenarios in her mind: where to aim, when to release, how to move if her position was compromised. The training Kaagání had provided now cycled through her thoughts with methodical precision. Just when the tension had become nearly unbearable, the first rider appeared on the horizon. Then another, 6 in total, just as reported. They rode in loose formation, rifles visible across their saddles, moving with the casual arrogance of men unaccustomed to resistance. As they drew closer, Lúuna's breath caught in her throat. Even at this distance, she recognized the leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his right cheek. The man who had personally executed her father. The man whose laugh had haunted her nightmares. Kaagání, positioned nearby, must have sensed her recognition. His hand briefly touched her arm, a silent reminder to maintain focus, to wait for the signal. The Apache plan called for allowing the riders to enter the center of the camp before revealing their presence. It was a calculated risk, letting the enemy penetrate their defenses, but ensuring they would be surrounded when the attack came. As the riders approached the first structures, they slowed, clearly puzzled by the camp's apparent desertion. They spread out, guns now drawn, scanning for movement. The leader barked orders, sending 2 men to check the largest wiki-ups. Kaagání raised his hand, holding the warriors in check despite the perfect opportunity. Wait. The signal would come when all 6 were fully committed, when retreat would be most difficult. One of the riders emerged from a dwelling, calling out to his leader. Though the words were indistinct at this distance, his triumphant tone carried clearly. He held something aloft. Lúuna recognized her silver locket, which she had left deliberately visible on a sleeping pallet. The scarred leader turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the surrounding terrain with new wariness. When his eyes passed over Lúuna's position, she felt a chill despite the desert heat. For a breathless moment, she thought he had spotted her, but his gaze moved on. He shouted commands, and his men began to regroup, suddenly alert to the possibility of ambush. They had realized too late that they had ridden into a trap. Kaagány's hand dropped. The signal. In that instant, the silent desert erupted with Apache war cries as warriors revealed their positions. The first arrows flew with deadly precision, finding targets before the marauders could fully comprehend what was happening. The battle for survival had begun. Chaos erupted as the marauders scrambled for cover, cursing and shouting. 2 fell, immediately, pierced by multiple arrows. The others returned fire, the crack of rifles splitting the air. One Apache warrior cried out and collapsed, clutching his shoulder. Lúuna held her position, forcing herself to breathe evenly as Kaagání had taught her. She knocked an arrow, sighted carefully on one of the remaining riders, and released. The arrow struck the man's thigh, not a killing blow, but enough to hamper his movement. His scream of pain was oddly satisfying. The scarred leader was shouting orders, attempting to organize a retreat. He fired methodically, his shots more precise than his panicking companions. An Apache fell, then another. The momentum was shifting. Kaagání signaled for the second phase of their plan. Warriors moved positions, encircling tighter, cutting off escape routes. Lúuna advanced with them, Kaagány's father's shield deflecting debris, kicked up by bullets striking nearby. Around her neck hung a small medicine bundle. Nijoni had prepared a leather pouch containing sacred herbs, a hawk feather, and a haidame, smooth stone from a holy spring. Its weight against her chest felt like armor, a spiritual protection complementing the physical shield she carried. One of the marauders broke from cover, running for his horse. Lúuna drew and fired in one fluid motion, just as she'd practiced countless times. Her arrow caught him squarely between the shoulder blades. He stumbled forward 2 more steps before collapsing face first into the dust dot, no time for reflection. Battle surged on. Kaagání had moved to engage the scarred leader directly, their fight a deadly dance of knife and rifle butt, too close for either to use projectile weapons effectively. The leader was larger, but Kaagání moved with the swift precision of a lifetime hunter. A movement to her left caught Lúuna's attention, one of the wounded marauders, crawling toward a dropped rifle. She redirected, placing herself between him and the weapon. When he looked up and saw her, recognition dawned in his eyes. "The settlement girl," he wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Thought we got all of you." "You were wrong," Lúuna replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She drew her bow, aiming directly at his face. "Do it," he taunted. "Bet you ain't never killed a man before." She hesitated, not from fear, but from a sudden, crystalline realization killing this man wouldn't restore her family or erase her pain. The revelation was oddly freeing. "I don't need to kill you to defeat you," she said, lowering her bow slightly. The man lunged suddenly, a knife appearing in his hand as he slashed at her legs. Lúuna sidestepped, bringing the heavy edge of the shield down on his wrist with a sickening crack. The knife fell from his nerveless fingers as he howled in pain. Apache warriors converged, securing the wounded marauder. Across the clearing, Kaagání and the scarred leader were still locked in combat. Blood streaked both men's faces, their movements growing, labored with fatigue. When the leader landed a powerful blow that sent Kaagání staggering backward, Lúuna's heart seized. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving toward them, bow drawn. The scarred man saw her approach and sneered, displaying tobacco-stained teeth behind the livid line that bisected his cheek. "Should have finished you when I had the chance, girl," he spat, shifting his attention momentarily from Kaagání. That split-second diversion was all Kaagání needed. He surged forward, his knife finding the vulnerable spot beneath the larger man's ribs. The leader's eyes widened in shock and pain as he dropped to his knees. Lúuna stood before him, arrow aimed at his heart, face painted with Apache symbols of protection and victory. The man who had haunted her nightmares now knelt bleeding in the dust, his expression changing from rage to disbelief. "Do it," he growled, echoing his companion's challenge. "Finish it." Lúuna's fingers tensed on the bowstring. One release, and the architect of her family's destruction would be gone forever. Justice, vengeance, closure, all waiting on the movement of her fingers. She lowered the bow. "You killed my family," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet battleground. "You destroyed my home. But you don't get to make me a killer like you." The leader's face contorted with contempt. "Weak," he spat, blood staining his words. "No," Kaagání said, moving to stand beside Lúuna. "Strong. Stronger than you." A commotion at the camp's edge drew everyone's attention. Riders approached many riders, their whoops identifying them as Apache from allied bands. The reinforcements they had sent for days ago had finally arrived. The battle's outcome, already tilting in their favor, was now sealed. Of the 6 marauders, 3 lay dead, 2 were wounded and captured, and the scarred leader knelt defeated between Lúuna and Kaagání, his life bleeding out into the thirsty desert soil as warriors from the allied band dismounted and moved. To secure the scene, Kaaganí's hand found Lúuna's, their fingers intertwining in a grip that spoke of survival, victory, and something deeper that needed no name. Sunset painted the sky in hues of flame and blood as the Apache tended to their wounded and honored their dead. 3 warriors had fallen in the battle, their bodies now prepared for the journey to the spirit world with solemn ceremonies that Lúuna observed from a respectful distance. The 2 surviving marauders had been bound and taken by the allied band. Who would decide their fate? The scarred leader had not survived his wounds, dying with curses on his lips and hatred in his eyes. His body and those of his fallen companions had been removed from the camp and left in a distant ravine for the desert, to reclaim no ceremony, no prayers, merely disposal. Lúuna sat outside her wickiup, grinding healing herbs that Nijoni had gathered for poultices. Her hands worked mechanically, while her mind processed the day's events. She had faced her nightmares in flesh and blood, had stood her ground, had even taken a life in battle. Yet the hollow ache she had carried since her family's deaths remained diminished. Perhaps, but not erased. Kaagání approached, his wounded arm now properly bandaged. He carried a water skin and a small bundle of special herbs plants that Lúuna recognized from their gathering expeditions as particularly valued for their healing properties. For warriors, he explained, setting the bundle beside her grinding stone. You fought well. I didn't kill him, she said quietly. The man who killed my family. I had the chance, but didn't take it. Kaagání settled beside her, his shoulder, just touching hers, a point of warmth in the cooling evening air. Some think mercy is weakness, he said. I think mercy is strength most difficult to find. He studied her profile in the fading light. Why did you choose this strength? Lúuna considered the question carefully. Killing him wouldn't bring my family back. It wouldn't erase what happened. She paused, finding words for feelings still taking shape within her. And I didn't want to carry his death with me for the rest of my life. I've seen enough death. He nodded slowly, understanding in his dark eyes. The dead walk with us always. Better to walk with those we loved than those we hated. A simple wisdom resonated deeply. Lúuna had been carrying her family's killers with her as surely as she carried memories of her loved ones. Perhaps now she could begin to release the former and honor the latter. Around them, the camp gradually resumed its rhythms. Children had been brought back from the mountain refuge, their voices adding life to the somber atmosphere. Women tended cooking fires, and men repaired damaged structures. The resilience of the Apache, their ability to face death and still embrace life, struck Lúuna anew. What happens now? She asked, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. Before Kaagání could answer, one of the tribal elders approached. He was an imposing figure despite his age, his bearing regal and his gaze penetrating. He had been among those most skeptical of Lúuna's presence, initially. To her surprise, he addressed her directly in halting English. You fought for Apache, bled for Apache. He gestured to a shallow cut on her arm. She had barely noticed in the heat of battle. Now you Apache, if you choose. The offer stunned her. To be accepted not merely as a guest or ally, but as one of them, it was more than she had ever expected. The elder withdrew, leaving her with the magnitude of his words. Kaagání remained silent beside her, allowing her space to process the invitation. Is this possible? She finally asked. I wasn't born to your people. Apache not just blood, he replied. Apache is heart, spirit. He touched his chest, then hers. You already Apache here. Now others see too. Tears welled unexpectedly in Lúuna's eyes, not from grief this time, but from a profound sense of belonging she had thought forever lost. She had come to this camp expecting death or captivity. Instead, she had found community, purpose, and a man whose quiet strength had helped her rediscover her own. As full darkness descended, the tribe gathered around the central fire for a ceremony of thanksgiving for their victory and remembrance. For those lost, drums beat a heartbeat rhythm, and voices rose in songs that needed no translation, their meaning carried in the cadence and emotion. Nijoni found Lúuna and Kaagání at the edge of the gathering. The old woman carried a small clay pot filled with a salve of her own making, a mixture of beeswax, bear fat, and herbs known for their healing properties. With gentle hands, she applied it to their various cuts and bruises, murmuring prayers. of healing as she worked. When she finished, she looked between them with knowing eyes. Taking Lúuna's hand and placing it in her grandson's, she spoke a blessing in Apache, then in English. What was broken now heals. What was lost now found. As the firelight flickered against the desert night, Kaagání's fingers tightened around Lúuna's. When he leaned forward and his lips found hers in a first tentative kiss, it felt like the most natural conclusion to a journey neither could have imagined when it began. 2 moons had passed since the battle. The desert bloomed with unexpected color after late summer rains, wildflowers carpeting what had been barren earth. The Apache camp had been rebuilt, wounds had healed, and life had settled into new patterns. Word had spread among frontier settlements about the defeat of the marauders. A cavalry detachment had even visited the camp, unusually respectful as they confirmed the deaths of men who had been terrorizing both white settlements and native camps for months. They had seemed surprised to find Lúuna among the Apache, even more surprised at her clear choice to remain. This morning, Lúuna rose before dawn as had become her habit. She dressed in the clothing of an Apache woman, not the simple garment she had first been given, but elaborately decorated buckskin that she had helped craft under Nijoni's guidance. Her hands, once soft and uncalloused, now moved with the practiced efficiency of one who had mastered essential skills of survival and craft outside. Kaagání waited, his face painted with ceremonial symbols she now recognized as those worn by a bridegroom. Today was their wedding day, conducted according to Apache tradition after a proper courtship period overseen by watchful elders. "Are you ready?" he asked, the English words still careful on his tongue, despite his improving fluency. Lúuna nodded, feeling a calm certainty that stood in stark contrast to the desperation that had marked her arrival at this camp. "I'm ready." They walked together to a small spring where Nijoni waited with several other elder women. The grandmothers had spent days preparing for this ceremony, weaving the special blanket that would unite the couple according to ancient customs. The blanket was a masterpiece of Apache weaving, decorated with symbols of unity, fertility, and protection. As Nijoni draped it over their shoulders, binding them together, she recited prayers in Apache that called upon ancestors to witness and bless the union. Lúuna and Kaagání drank from the spring, first separately, then from a shared vessel symbolizing their individual strengths joining into one life. The assembled tribe called out blessings and good wishes, many including references to children and long life that made Lúuna blush despite her growing comfort with Apache directness. After the ceremony came a feast and celebration that would last until nightfall. As was tradition, Lúuna and Kaagání greeted each tribal member, accepting gifts and advice with equal grace. Children presented them with small treasures, pretty stones, feathers, woven grass figures, while adults offered more practical items for their new shared dwelling. During a quiet moment between well-wishers, Kaagání led Lúuna to the edge of the celebration where they could speak privately. From his belt pouch, he withdrew her silver locket, the one the marauders had found, the one that had been recovered after the battle. "This belongs to you," he said, placing it in her palm. "Your past, important to remember." Lúuna opened locket, gazing at her mother's portrait. A familiar face no longer brought sharp pain, just a gentle ache of remembrance. "Thank you," she said, closing it again, "for understanding that I can have both my memories and my future. 2 streams joining to make stronger river," he replied with the poetic metaphor typical of Apache wisdom. A small commotion drew their attention back to the gathering. A young boy of perhaps 6 years was being ceremoniously presented to them by his mother. The child, shy but determined, carried a small bow he had clearly made himself. "He asks if you will teach him to track and hunt." Kaagání translated the boy's whispered request. "He says he wants to be brave, like the woman warrior who stood against bad men." Lúuna knelt to the child's level, touched beyond words by this testament to her place in the tribe. "Tell him I would be honored," she said, accepting the boy's gift with formal seriousness that made him stand taller with pride. As sunset painted the western sky in hues of gold and crimson, Lúuna and Kaagání stood together on the rise overlooking the camp, the same spot where they had once kept watch for enemies, where they had first begun to speak of deeper things beneath the star-filled sky. "Are you happy?" he asked simply. Lúuna considered the question, not with the quick, automatic response of social convention, but with the thoughtful assessment he deserved. She thought of all she had lost, all she had found, all she had become in this unexpected journey. "Yes," she answered finally, her hand finding his. "Not because I've forgotten the past, but because I've found a future worth embracing." Below them, the Apache camp pulsed with life and community. Children played, elders told stories, warriors kept watch. And in Lúuna's heart, where fear and grief had once reigned, now grew something stronger and more enduring, belonging as the first. Stars appeared in the deepening blue of evening. Kaagání and Lúuna walked hand in hand toward their shared dwelling and the life that awaited them, a life neither could have imagined when a desperate woman had stumbled into an Apache camp, offering herself in exchange for safety, but finding instead peace, protection, and purpose beyond measure.